على خير الخلائق أجمعين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم المصطفى محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل.
Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Now today, as you noticed, unfortunately we have been suffering from some absences, with the absence of Sayyid Aqil and with the absence of Abu Zainab. But to honor their absences, we have to make sure that the message that they strive to send to us every single week, which is for us to come and do ihya on every Thursday night, we are here today to continue in that route and that journey until they come inshallah next week. And I would also, before I start my small little speech, would like to thank Sayyid Hassan Musawi for graciously allowing me to take his spot and dedicate the next 15-20 minutes in a small little topic. So thank you, Sayyid Hussein, and I hope that you gain some benefit from my speech. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Now the topic I decided to choose today was the topic of hardships, the hidden blessing. Why did I choose this topic? When I like to speak, I like to choose topics that can be related and relevant to every single person, despite their race, their religion, their culture. Hardships are part of the essence that is fabricated in the life that we live in. Every single human being, no matter how young, how old, how tall, how short, what's his color, it doesn't matter, we all face hardships. What is different though is how we approach those hardships and how we react to those hardships. So what I'm going to do tonight is emphasize and focus on the Islamic ideal way for us to deal with hardships. Before I tackle that, I'll summarize what I'm going to do. First of all, I'm going to answer the question, or try to answer the question of why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put us into hardship? Number two, I'm going to impose the argument or discussion on how do we actually, as normal human beings, react to hardships. And then number three, which is the main focus on this topic, is how ideally we should react when we are faced with hardships. So, question number one, why do we go through hardships? I have three different factors or answers to this question. The first answer, which is probably something that you might not understand at the beginning. We go through hardships in life because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves us. Now you're going to ask me, wait a minute, if you love someone, why do you put him through hardship? What I'm going to emphasize here is the fact that you have to not compare or put into the same balance the relationship between the Creator and His creation and between creation and creation. What do I mean by that? You see, us humans, when we like someone, we do not put him through hardship, we put him through ultimate ease. You know, if there's a student and the teacher likes him so much, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with such teachers. The teacher tries to help the student, tries to ease on him in the assignments maybe. The father, same thing, when he sees his son, he wants to make his life as easy as possible. He facilitates anything that he needs in order for him to enjoy a life of happiness. Now with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the equation is different. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves us, He puts us through hardship. Why? When we have a connection with someone, there is an element of fear in losing that connection. Now, as humans, when we are faced with ease, what do we tend to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We tend to slowly go away and we become revolved around the materialistic life that we live in. Because there's no hardship, everything is good, I do not have time to do more prayer and supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the other hand, when we are in hardship, what do? We tend to get closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah, in order to sustain this relationship with Him, from His graciousness and mercy, He puts us into trials so we can continue and persist into trying to get closer to Him because of our hardships, because of that risk, that fear that we might lose that connection. How can I reinforce this? Obviously, whenever I have something to reinforce, I can either relate to the Quran or the Hadith. And we have a Hadith Nabawi and Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, إِنَّ اللَّهَ إِذَا حَبَّ عَبْدًا ابْتَلَاهُ. And another Hadith by Imam Al-Kadhim alayhi salam. What does Imam Al-Kadhim alayhi salam? مَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِ كَمَثَلِ كَفَّتَيِ الْمِيزَانِ. كلما زيد في إيمانه زيد في بلائه. The believer is like a balance. Whenever his faith increases, his hardships increase too. How can I use a reference? How can I give an example on such a thing? Who are the closest people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Prophets and our imams, right? Look at Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Didn't he have to go through a hardship of having to almost slaughter his own son? Didn't Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam lose his eyesight and he lost his son Yusuf alayhi salam? Didn't Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam say, "Ma udhiya nabiyyun mithla ma udhit"? Isn't he the closest creation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He went through the most hardship. So we can derive from that and conclude that yes, when we are in hardship, that doesn't necessarily mean that we did trouble. It's a means for us to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's a factor for us to know that we are actually getting closer and closer to Him. That's why you see, usually the poor people are the closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although they're stripped from everything, from all the necessities and desires in this life, they're closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because they are in need of that support. They hang on to that rope of hope with Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the other hand, when we are blessed and showered with mercy, we tend to forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is my first answer to this question. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
The second answer to why we go into troubles or tribulations or challenges is the following. This life is a test. How can you undertake a test when it's so easy? It defeats the purpose, right? If I go into an exam and the test, I have the answers for it, it doesn't become a test at all. In the same way, in the same aspect, in the same dimension, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world for Him to test us, to see if we are worthy of entering paradise. That is referred to in Surah Al-Mulk. الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. He had created life and death for Him to test who has the best or the most good of deeds of you, humankind. So we now know that tests are it's an essential part in life. It's a means or a factor through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can determine if we are worthy of entering paradise. The whole test revolves around this, hardships. My contacts are a little shaky. So, I need another verse to reinforce my point. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran? In response to those who think or believe or have that faith that life should be easy, there should be no hardship, I should just pray, be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in return, I should get everything I want, and then enter paradise. There should be no hardship. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in answer to those people? Look at this verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking a question. Do you think that you're going to go into paradise without going through the trials that the people before you went through? And I continue. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what did the people that came before us go through? مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا. They have been through or encountered suffering and adversity until they what? They were shaken in spirit. That's just a metaphor to explain how tough these hardships were. They were shaken. And what? حَتَّى يَقُولَ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. Until even the Prophet and the believers with him are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when are we gonna have victory or receive help? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end says what? أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ. Indeed, the victory and the help of Allah is close, is near. Now this indirectly puts in an element of patience that we need to enter or embody in our attitude, and that's something I'm going to talk to very soon. Now, and there's also one last verse that I'm going to use. حسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. Surah Al-Ankabut. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also put in the question in line, do people who says that we are believers think that they're going to be considered as believers without them going through hardship? No. And with that, I also want to emphasize that you will notice that we don't all go through the same level of hardship, right? Each person has his own capabilities. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Right? So each person goes through his own trials. So do not use that as a parameter for you to compare, oh, this person is going through this much trouble, why am I getting this trouble? Oh, Ya Allah, do you love him more? And so on. You have to know that each person has his own capabilities, his own limits. So do not use that as a comparison point for you. Just have faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a reason behind everything. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Now these were two answers. Now sorry, I'm referring back to my papers because I want to make sure that I'm using the verses from the Quran properly and reciting them properly. And I didn't have much time to prepare everything, so I apologize if I'm stuttering a little bit or looking down on the paper. If I had the choice, I wouldn't put my eyes away from your beautiful faces, but sometimes I have to. Okay. So we discussed two different answers, right? One, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us so we can get closer to Him. Number two, He puts us into hardship because that's part of the essence of life, for us to be tested. Number three, why do we get into hardships? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also puts us into hardships to cleanse us and clean us and purify us from sin, right? Why and how? Let me explain this. As I said before, when we are in ease, we tend to slowly move from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fast forward, Hassan is going to school, tucking his shirt, everything is good, studying. He goes into examination time. What does Hassan do? His salah turns into salat al-Ja'far al-Tayyar, subhanallah. From 2 minutes salah into 10 minutes, into supplication, into salat al-Layl. Why? Because I'm feeling that I'm in hardship. I feel like I need that support. So we're trying to fool ourselves as if our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a materialistic business-to-business relationship. We have to do something and get something back, which is completely wrong. And that's unfortunately what we tend to do. So you see that slowly people, when they're in ease, they tend to move away more and more from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His mercy again, to call us back, what does He do? He puts us into hardship. Flowers are crushed for the fragrance, right? When you're sick, you take the pain of that small little needle so you can feel better eternally. It's the same ideology. You go through limited or temporary hardship so you can get permanent ease. Inshallah. Now with that permanent ease, you have to keep in mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Inna ma'al usri yusra. With hardship comes ease. He doesn't say there's only hardship, there's only ease. Which also stresses that when you're in hardship, there's always ease in that hardship. You might not see it, but you're still better than someone else. من رأى مصيبة غيره هانت عليه مصيبة. If you see someone else's problems, your problems, you'll become more adaptable to your problems. You'll become more acceptable for your problems if you see how bad other people's problems are, right? Now, also, I'm going to put this metaphor to bring the picture closer of why we are going through tests. Now, in school, there's a student-professor relationship, right? In the exam room, when you have that exam on that table, Abu Kayyan sometimes wants to, he doesn't know the answer. He does dua, but unfortunately, he doesn't get that message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help him. So he needs help. He raises his hand to the professor. Professor, can you come help me? The professor says, no, I can't. It defeats the purpose of the exam, right? So when you're in an exam room, you're not allowed to ask any questions. It's the complete opposite with your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How? Let me explain to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in essence puts us into these hardships so we can raise our hands and ask for His interference to help us. You see the difference? So we go through these hardships, we go through these struggles, that we, exercise every single option, and we run out of options. We think about the problem, we revolve around it, we don't find an answer. And then our only last rope of escape is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whether we like it or not, and whether this microphone likes it or not, we tend to, at the end, go to the direction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is also one of the reasons why, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, He's putting us into these hardships. And also hardships, they are heavy to carry out on our own. When they say, when it rains, it pours, all the hardships come at you at once, you feel, that's the point. It's too tough for you to carry on your own. That's why you seek help and refuge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are my 3 different answers to that question. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Before I finish that point, And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also references that in the Quran by saying, what? لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ, right? لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَضَرَّعُونَ, and so on. So the point of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I put that as a part of my mercy so you can adjust your sails towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then go back to Him. Now, that's the first point. Number two, how do we actually, as normal average human beings, deal with hardships? Instantly, when we are faced with hardships, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angry at us. It's doom and gloom, it's dark, it's anxiety, it's depression. We feed our minds with, why did I go through this? Did I do something wrong? Is it because I missed Friday prayers last week? And then you start, dwelling over the actual problem itself. You're not using that problem as a signal, as an alert that, maybe it's time to reassess yourself and come close to Allah. No, just revolve and dwell into the problem itself. And you start dwelling into anxiety, depression, and worry. Although Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His book never says worry, He always says trust me. So, as humans, you have to know that we are products of our thoughts. Whatever we feed in this mind, we become products of. So, if you're in hardship and all you're thinking about is bad information, and you just feed your mind with negativity, then automatically you're going to be even more depressed, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even for those people, Quran is a guide for everything. Even for those people, He references them in the Quran. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَقُولُ آمَنَّا. And there's from those people who say that we are believers. What do they do? فَإِذَا أُوذِيَ فِي اللَّهِ جَعَلَ فِتْنَةَ النَّاسِ كَعَذَابِ اللَّهِ. In Surah Al-Ankabut 2. I'll translate. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and there are some people who say we are believers in Allah, but when some of them is harmed in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they consider the trials of people as punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They completely switch, they flip from complete believers to, oh Allah, you're punishing those people because they're faced with hardships. These are the people that we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we do not become one-off. Those very surface, basic Muslims who just switch like a chameleon, You put a chameleon, an animal, a chameleon, you put him in any surrounding, the animal turns its colors based on its surroundings. So these are those kind of people. When they're in the mosque, they are praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they're their own and they have problems, they switch and they're like, they blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything. So you have to know that this is not the right way to deal or react to such a position. I also reference here that you should also know that trials, they always have a hidden message or blessing in them. You know the story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam with Sayyidina Khidr, when Sayyidina Musa thought that he knows everything, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him to go and walk with Sayyidina Khidr to see what kind of hidden knowledge he has. And then Sayyidina Khidr said to Sayyidina Musa, إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِي صَبْرًا. You will not have patience with me. Why? Because Sayyidina Musa would see that Sayyidina Khidr would, he killed a child. He put a hole in the ship. He then built a wall. It all didn't make any sense. But when he actually, this is in Surah Al-Kahf, which we recite every Friday, when he actually looked at the hidden messages, Sayyidina Khidr said, at the end of the story, to summarize it, he said, I killed that kid because he was to grow up into an oppressor, into a taghiya. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His mercy, decided to take his soul away for his parents so that He can replace them with better parents. And that ship that you see I made a hole from, there was a very evil king who wanted to take that ship. So I had to put that hole to make it faulty so that the king says, I don't want it. And it will be easily fixed, and so on. So sometimes we don't get the signal right away. We got to be patient to know what the whole message is derived or behind that hardship or challenge or calamity that we are going through. So do not لا تتسرع بالحكم. Do not jump into conclusions right away, or jump like we do on Sunday when we go swimming. Okay. So what should we do? And this is towards the end of my speech. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us what we should do as Muslims. قُلْ لَنْ يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَهُ اللَّهُ لَنَا. Right? Now, musiba means what? From Arabic, from asaba, right? It means it's directed to you. There is a message, there is something that is sent specifically to you. It's like an arrow sent towards you. So the believers say, مَا أَصَابَنَا مِن مُصِيبَةٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. So they believe that everything that came to them, those hardships, those calamities, they came in intention and purpose from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They accept it. So they have the attitude. They have the attitude of acceptance, that this is for my benefit. They have that belief. However, when I say this, it doesn't necessarily mean that I just say, qada wa qadar, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, and everything. You can't, there's asbab, there's musabbibat, there's reasons, there's justifications, You can't say, oh Allah, let me please pass this calculus exam, and on the other hand, you're not even studying. It's not going to work, If you're a disbeliever and you study for the exam, and you're a believer and you don't study, the disbeliever will pass the exam. It's a rule, it's a life rule, right? So do not always put those parameters that anything happens just because of Allah. Also be realistic with your judgment. But you have to be patient, and you have to have patience. And I'm going to use that as the final verse that I use for tonight. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say? He says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. And we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and a loss of wealth and lives and fruits. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say? وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Give good tidings to the patient. Why? Or who are the patient, actually, first? الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ راجعون. Those who are faced with a calamity or a problem, they say, to God we belong, and to Him we shall return. The believers say, okay, everything in this life is materialistic, it's temporary. It's going to come and go. I do not own anything in this life, including my own body. So why am I being worried and sad about something I do not even own? Makes no sense, right? So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about those people who are patient and say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَاتْبُكَانِ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَبِّهِمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُهْتَدُونَ. Those people, they're the ones who have blessings from their Lord and mercy. And it is those who are the righteous and guided ones. So that's a whole story. That's all what we need. Patience, acceptance, devotion and supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, inshallah, things will become better. I end with this. I always like to, when I talk and reference Karbala, I don't always like to just use Karbala as a metaphor for us to be sad only. It's a school. For every single topic that we discuss, Karbala is a school. How can I use this in this aspect? We all know the hardship of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. But let me go now to al-Masa'ib Zainab alayhi salam. So Zainab alayhi salam, after she lost all her family, and then she was taken from Karbala to Sham, and then Yazid, may Allah curse him, what did he say to her? He said to her, what did you see of what I did to your brother Hussein? What did Sayyida Zainab, after all these calamities and hardships, say? If I was a normal person, I would say, oh, why Allah did you put me through this, and complain and be in sorrow and grief. She said, مَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا. I did not see but beauty, but good from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can you imagine how much faith do you have for you to reach that stage where you're showered in calamities and you still see that light in the midst of the dark and gloom? Those are the people that we come every Thursday and honor. It is those lessons that we should derive from these figures and then implement them and apply them in our day-to-day lives. At the end, tough times do not last, but tough people do. My only prayer is to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not put our hardships and calamities in our religion. Allahumma la taj'al musibatana fi dinina. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.